This is For Keeps, a podcast about collections and connections. I'm David Peterkowski. This collector's story is set in the unlikeliest of places, a tiny island in New England, some 20 miles out to sea. On that rocky outpost lives an out-of-the-way community that recently made a name for itself because of a certain collection of books at its small community library. The hubbub even generated a comment from one of the literary world's biggest names, who called in to this very podcast with a special message you'll hear at the end of this episode. And to think, all the fuss started with an off-the-cuff post on Facebook. The island in question is Matinicus Island, Maine, the most remote inhabited settlement in the state, with a year-round population of under 100 people, most of whom work in commercial fishing. And the Facebook post in question was posted in February 2022 on the page of the volunteer-run Matinicus Island Library. That post touched on a hot topic: attempts to ban books in U.S. libraries due to their content. According to the American Library Association, in 2021, there were 729 challenges to library, school, and university materials. And since each challenge can contain multiple book titles, it was reported that nearly 1,600 individual books were either challenged or removed. That's the highest level the Library Association has seen since it started tracking book challenges 20 years ago. And that brings us to Eva Murray. She's an author herself, and the treasurer of the Matinicus Island Library Association. And this is what she wrote on Facebook back in February. As a response to the current struggle in some places with regard to banning books, a move which we consider offensive and contrary to the best interests of the public, the Matinicus Island Library Association will be acquiring a number of titles this month which have appeared on banned book lists. We have funding for this. If you have a suggestion for a book, not just because it's banned somewhere, but hopefully because you think people here will actually wish to read it, please contact Eva Murray with your recommendation. Thank you. That post caught the attention of an area newspaper reporter who mentioned it in a news article. Then, the Associated Press picked up the story, spreading it further. Smithsonian Magazine then wrote a feature on the Matinicus Library and its banned books, and before Eva knew it, it seemed the news media couldn't stop talking about the tiny island with its controversial collection. A collection that, to be clear, is a modest 50 to 75 books. As the library's treasurer, Eva has curated that collection by going to the Maine mainland and acquiring many of the suggested books in question. Others have been donated. Those books range from classics such as Catch-22 by Joseph Heller and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, to books for younger readers such as And Tango Makes Three, a picture book about a same-sex couple of penguins raising a baby penguin at New York's Central Park Zoo. The media attention and the outpouring of positive reinforcement from well-meaning supporters of the cause has been a bit overwhelming for Eva and her fellow volunteers. But she's good-humored about it all and seems to be taking it in stride, as she appears to do generally with the challenges that come with living in such a small, remote community. The challenges of life on Matinicus mean that Eva, like many of her neighbors, wears many hats.
I have a lot of part-time jobs. I have no career. Living in a community of under 100 people most of the year, the only industry on this island, full-time industry, is lobster fishing. So if you're not a commercial fisherman for lobster, then you're several other things if you're making a living. In my case, I am an emergency medical technician volunteer. I am the municipal clerk, which means I run elections and things like that. I have a bakery business in the summertime, seasonal only. which is full-time for about 10 weeks a year. I am a freelance writer, and I have several area newspaper columns. I am the solid waste and recycling coordinator and truck driver for our very small town. And over the years, I've done a few other things as well. Those seem to be the ones that are the top of the list this year.
Eva has lived on Matinicus for more than 3 decades, first drawn to the island back in the late 80s by a job.
I came out for the 87-88 academic year to be the teacher in the one-room school. And I had pretty close to one student in each grade. Not exactly, but close to it. And thought I was only going to stay for a year. I had an acceptance to graduate school, which I had deferred to for a year. I left for the next summer because I had a job obligation, but came right back and got engaged to the electrician who was already living here. Did not end up going to graduate school, but my teaching job was just that 1 year. So I came back another year without a job and ended up married, raising 2 children, taking on all sorts of other part-time jobs over the course of 35 years. But I do not get to say I am from here. Being from here means you have 6 generations in the cemetery. But I can say that I've never spent a single day here on vacation. So I don't have rosy-colored glasses about this island. It's not a place to get away from the real world. It's not a place, oh, we're on island time. It's so relaxing. All these things that people say when they're here on vacation. I've never experienced this place as anywhere except a place to work.
Uh-huh. So, if one is even able to paint in broad strokes about Matinicus, how would you describe the folks who live on the island year-round?
As I said, the basis of our economy is commercial fishing. So, most of the people who live here year-round are what I would describe as busy, for one thing. They're not retirees for the most part. They're not vacationers for the most part. They're either fishermen or they're people involved in some of the other things that are required to keep a community going, like building trades, the postmaster, the school teacher, a couple of people who work in the town office part-time, the passenger boat captain. Now, having named all these jobs, many of them are the same people. We have a small independent municipal power company out here. We do not have a cable to the mainland. We're a good, strong 20 miles from the mainland, and there is no cable. So we generate electricity with a small power company out here. Telephone and internet are dish to dish over the water, and everybody's on a private well. So anybody who's doing non-fishing work, none of those jobs, electrician, phone man, postmaster, all of those things, they're all pretty much part-time. So you end up doing several of them to put together a living. So most of the people here they're very resourceful. There's a very high skill set. A large number of them have chosen to be here. There aren't necessarily as many island natives as you might expect, certainly fewer than there were even 10 or 20 years ago. So in many cases, there are people who have chosen to come here, but not people who have chosen to come here to relax. In some cases, there are people who are sort of escapees from the cubicle. And they like the sense that you have to get up in the morning and solve your own problems. It isn't entirely self-sufficiency, but it's kind of approaching it. You and a very small group of neighbors have to deal with whatever comes along, whether it's a mechanical problem, a medical emergency, a birth, a death, a funeral, a wedding, whatever. You're going to bake cookies and show up and help. Everybody's on the fire department. If there's some kind of emergency or crisis or any kind of happy occasion, pretty much everybody goes. It isn't that it's one big happy family. It's more like it's one big grumpy 7th grade sometimes. But still, when the chips are down, everybody shows up and does what they can to help. And when there's a happy occasion, it brings together people who, are just looking for an excuse for there to be some kind of event to bring food and go to. There isn't a lot of entertainment.
Maybe not. But one way to pass the time is by visiting the island's library, which, from how Eva describes it, probably doesn't look like your town's library.
Our library is basically a pair of 8 by 20 utility sheds. So basically 2 small rooms. It's not a large facility. Just incidentally, I'm the treasurer of the Matinicus Island Library Association 501c3. So I'm not really the librarian in the sense of being the person who has the collection memorized. I'm just the person who pays the utility bills and does the paperwork. But the library is largely my baby, and I end up doing a lot of the answering of questions and correspondence, stuff like that.
And at what point did you and your fellow islanders decide to set up a library?
I think the official beginning of the library was December 2015, January 2016. If I remember right, the first check that was ever written was December 2015 when we officially started the organization. I was involved in about 19 years ago, involved in starting the recycling program out here. We never had any kind of municipal solid waste system, so we never had an official dump. And everybody had to take care of their trash on their own, which in most cases meant either a burn barrel in the backyard or they'd take it overboard. Anyway, long story short, one of the sheds that we used for processing and sorting recyclables started to accumulate books, and we threw up some shelves, and the books filled the shelves, and we built some more shelves, and it filled the rest of the shelves. People were bringing books to just pass along to the next person. And they were kind of rim-racked old paperbacks that had been to the beach too many times. They weren't anything worth going to any trouble over. But people would start to come to the recycling sheds and say, "Can I look at the books? I just want to look and see if there's anything I might want to read." And it kind of became a very informal, popular little library. A lot of it was just crap, but some of it was neat stuff that a lot of people read.
With the shed of books becoming more of a gathering spot, an effort was made to make the place a little more inviting.
We hired a carpenter who happens to be the same person as the island passenger boat captain, tax collector, and veterinarian. We hired that carpenter to renovate the interior. First, we had to raise funds for this. We raised a bunch of money. People were into it and donated money. We had a nice interior built in this storage shed. So it was insulated, a pleasant inside, rather than just smelling like an old musty shed. It was, nice fresh pine boards, lots of shelving, and a bright interior, and, had the electrician, my husband, in to put some lights and outlets in, and made it into a very kind of a pleasing, comfortable little space for a tiny building. And we did not have to buy books. Books just came out of the woodwork. Everybody wanted to donate books. Got to the point where we had to start to be strict about what we could accept, mostly in terms of physical condition, because everybody assumed that they could clean out their attic on us. And we're like, actually, we don't have room for, moldy oldies. We just kind of want the good stuff, because it took almost no time to fill the shelves in that building.
The library quickly became what Eva describes as a happy place for the community. And helping it grow was some financial assistance that came from a foundation that bears the name of one of Maine's favorite literary sons.
One thing led to another, and a couple of the regular volunteers put in a grant application to the Stephen and Tabitha King Foundation. And that would be Stephen King, the well-known horror writer from Bangor, Maine. He donates money to libraries on a regular basis and other agencies, but he likes small libraries. They got a grant. And we got another shed. Had the same carpenter do another lovely interior. And that opened up last spring as the children's library. So now that's our second room. The only thing that we can't do to become an official library in the eyes of the state of Maine is we don't have a bathroom, because we are on property that technically belongs to the Congregational Church, doesn't belong to the Library Association, and there isn't room for anything like a septic system or anything on it, so it's going to remain fairly primitive in that sense.
So let's talk about the aspect of the library that's gotten you and the library and the island a fair amount of media attention, and that's the collection of banned and challenged books that you've helped acquire for it. How did that idea come about?
When the business of banning books sort of became a hot news topic last winter, and we started seeing over and over and over references to libraries being strong-armed by their communities into pulling things off shelves, and largely these were school libraries, where school boards had a lot to say, rather than public libraries, community libraries. But I just made a statement on the library's Facebook page, well, we don't do that here, Yeah, we have banned books here. Come read Huck Finn, whatever. I did not think I was making a big deal statement, and I sure as heck didn't think it was going to result in press coverage, media coverage worldwide, at least in England and other English-speaking countries. I had no idea this was going to be a big deal. I was just trying to get something up on the Facebook page every now and then, so I had kind of continuous social media presence. I didn't think I was saying anything that would attract any attention. A reporter from the Bangor Daily News, who is somebody I know, got in touch a few months ago and said she saw the post about we don't ban books here and wondered if she could interview me, sort of similar conversation as you and I are having. We talked about the origin of the library, we talked about the Internet Hub, we talked about the Children's Library, we talked about the Stephen and Tabitha King Foundation grant, we talked about how it's all volunteer run, and we talked a little bit about, we had some banned books and we had people donate some money specifically for banned books, so I had been to a couple of local bookstores in Rockland, Maine and bought what they had on their tables for banned books. I asked library users for recommendations for books that they would enjoy or had enjoyed and thought others would, which had been banned in other places. They said, if you recommend a book, I will get it. So I had this list of recommended books, and I went and bought them from brick and mortar booksellers in the Rockland area. And that list had a couple of dozen titles on it, maybe 30 titles on it. Well, that subject seemed to be the only thing that this Bangor Daily News' reporter's editor took any interest in, not all the rest of it. So that story became a piece about Matinicus Island having banned books, and our library feels strongly that we don't ban books here.
The story of the banned book collection on Matinicus proved irresistible to many media outlets, and it began to spread.
The Associated Press got hold of it somehow and rewrote another story. I don't know who wrote it, just somebody for the Associated Press. They never checked with me. They never contacted the island. They just wrote a story for the AP that said that this little tiny island library on this remote island in Maine wanted all the books, anybody could send it from everywhere, because we need all the books we can get, which is not true. And that we specialize in banned books, which is not true. So no harm was done, thankfully, in the long run, although I was expecting to get just carton after carton after carton of junk in the mail, which didn't happen. But a lot of people wrote to me and said things like a utility company in Arkansas got in touch and said, well, we're sending a line crew up to help out with a project in Maine. Do you want us to fill our bucket trucks with banned books for you? Now, I know a little bit about power company line trucks. The last thing they need is to be trying to figure out, once they got to Rockland, Maine, how they were going to get 10 boxes of books to this island, which they cannot drive to. I said, yes, thank you very much. Not necessary. We're good. Thank you. We do not have daily ferries. You cannot just drive back and forth to this island at will. It's very much like Alaska. In some parts of Alaska, it's largely served by a small bush pilot air taxi service. Little Cessnas, weather permitting only, and very expensive. So we have a logistics and freight consideration that most places don't have.
Even with those limitations, Eva has helped fill the library's shelves with more than a few controversial books, such as The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and Sula by Toni Morrison, among many others. And though Eva maintains she's no expert on those books themselves, she is clear on one thing. The whole issue of banned books perplexes her.
To me, it's very odd that there's anything, any reason for confrontation. Widely recognized classics, books by well-loved, reputable, popular American authors of color, young adult novels with an LGBTQ theme, things like that. I don't see any of that as the sort of thing that anybody here would wish to ban or have any, feel it was their business to suggest somebody else should not read. And so, there are certainly books in our collection that fit that description. We do have books such as And Tango Makes Three, which is a very cute little children's picture book about two male penguins that raised the chick together in the Central Park Zoo. What's the deal? It actually happened. It's nonfiction. It's a charming little book. It isn't something that anybody out here would see as edgy or sketchy or that there's any sort of comfort issues with. I find it offensive that a book like that, somebody would come along and say, you shouldn't have that there. Why not? So we are trying to sort of make a statement by having books that have been banned in other places to a limited degree. That doesn't mean that we can collect every book that anybody else ever found fault with. We're not big enough to be that.
All of the press surrounding the tiny library's banned book collection has led Eva to field some interesting inquiries from well beyond the island.
I had some very bizarre phone calls from people and emails from people saying, I wrote a book that was banned by the Florida Department of Corrections in 1962. Do you need it for your collection? Or, I've got a 1923 edition of Little Black Sambo. Do you need it for your project? And I'm like, no, we don't actually have a project. We just have a little community library. So the assumption that we are somehow specializing in banned books is not, in fact, true. And although it might be sort of cool to have a large collection of banned books as such, we are tiny. We're already busy specializing in Maine and sort of maritime and out to sea themes and local Maine authors and that sort of thing. We don't really have the physical space to be the repository of all books that somebody else, for whatever reason, objected to once somewhere. That's really kind of not our shtick.
Mm-hmm. So just to be clear, it's not as though you're actively monitoring the American Library Association's requests to remove books from other libraries and schools. This is just kind of a thing that came up organically?
Right. No, we were not making a particular project, and it was nobody's particular task to monitor it. The only reason that we reacted when we did was we were reacting to Facebook, basically. All kinds of scary stories about book banning in other places, and we just said, purely in the interest of, every now and then I put something on the library's page, and it's usually a cartoon with a library theme or something else very light, very, very low anxiety, basically just saying, hi there, we're here. I said, we don't ban books here. Now, are there books that we wouldn't want on our shelf? Possibly. I don't know who would actually make that decision. Probably it's not a problem we're ever going to face because we are not a research library. And if I thought we had high school and college kids in here writing papers about extremely frightening things and they needed source material that was neo-Nazi stuff or anything else like that kind of thing, that might be different. We're not a reference library. Nobody writes their term papers in there. And so nobody has brought us books that we've ever had to take a second look at.
Uh-huh. So a bigger picture question here, and I hope it's not too much of a stretch, but do you see a correlation between the general nature and attitudes of the residents of Matinicus with your desire to collect and share these books? Is there a cultural fit in a way?
Probably the cultural fit would be that whether you consider yourself politically liberal or politically conservative, and we certainly have people who feel both ways. Most people are somewhere in the middle, but we certainly have all sides of the political spectrum represented here. This is a community of people who consider themselves extremely independent, almost to the point of being a bit anarchist, and you're not going to tell me what to do. And you're not going to tell me what to do to the point of it's almost lawless. And that does have a downside. Sometimes you wish people were slightly more respectful of their neighbors in terms of if somebody does want to burn a bunch of tires, there's nothing you can do to stop them, that kind of thing. But for the most part, people behave safely toward their neighbors, but they do not like being told what to do. And so there's very little for government. There's very little for law enforcement. There's very little for authority out here. And I think that is kind of part of the culture. Some of the people who have chosen to move here have actually been drawn to that. I wish I could say live and let live. That's a little bit more of an ideal to aspire to than an actual perfected reality, but it is what we aspire to. And I think if somebody decided that they were going to go around telling other people, well, you can't have that book on the public shelf, that everybody else would say, oh yeah, watch me. We'll just keep putting another copy back up there. There's a rebelliousness against too much of authority out here. Let me try to say this as delicately as I can so I don't get anybody subpoenaed. But if you ask local law enforcement on the mainland and local media what the reputation of Matinicus Island is, they will say lawlessness and anarchy. They will say, oh, that's just a bunch of crazy pirates out there. Now, that's an exaggeration. It is something of a cultivated reputation that the lobster fishermen like because they don't want more lobster fishermen moving here because the harbor is full and the surrounding fishing area is oversaturated already. So it's a little bit of a business practice to cultivate that reputation for us being a bunch of cutthroats and wild-ass third world sort of crazies that live out there to sea. It is by no means an uncivilized place to live. It is by no means a dangerous place to live, but the reputation exists. However, even though the reputation for being kind of dangerous is a lot of nonsense, the reputation for being people who have escaped the micromanager at work and the sort of big brother, there aren't even any stop signs here. When you get to the four-way intersection, if you've got any brains, you stop and look both ways before you go through it. But there's no law telling you have to. Does that make sense? You can quote me on that.
I intend to. That's perfect. So are you getting tired of being asked about the banned books? Is it being overemphasized?
It is. But I'm not tired of talking about the library. I think it's really neat how much everybody loved it. It's a very good feeling, satisfying thing to be involved with. But I don't think we do any different with banned books than many libraries do. I think we're very typical in how we handle them. We push back a little bit against anybody who's sort of getting above themselves in terms of telling the rest of the public what they can read. We push back against that. But it's really not a local problem that we have. We're pushing back against an abstraction, not against a real problem we have in this community. Certainly when you have a community of under 100 people, there are going to be things that people argue about or hurt each other's feelings about or say things they ought not say or, step on each other's toes from time to time. Books in the library has never been one of those things.
Uh-huh. And is the library still accepting new books, banned or non-banned?
Yes, it is. But we ask people to just pick out a favorite or two if they want to donate books. And excellent physical condition is important, that they not smell like some musty old basement. And since we don't have a lot of room, for the most part, new books mean some old book has to go to give it space. So we welcome good contributions of books, but we are not looking to fatten up. So we want to make sure nothing in this podcast suggests to people that we need them to box up their 10 crates of cast-offs and send them our way, because it is a waste of their money, and it's not helpful to us. But if there's a book that doesn't look like it's moved in a year or two, and somebody sends us something better, we're going to get rid of the old one and replace it with the new one. So, if that's, and again, I suspect that's no different than anywhere.
Perhaps the issue of banning books and censorship is especially disheartening to Eva because she's an author herself, with 3 books to her name that reflect, in different ways, her perspectives on Matinicus life.
The first was called Well Out to Sea, which is a collection of newspaper columns having to do with year-round island life. And it was not written as a book. It was an assembly of columns that had previously been published in 8 or 10 different Maine publications. And that gives the reader some insight into really living here and really working here, not what it's like here to vacation. In 2012, Island Schoolhouse came out, which is, to my knowledge, the only book out there about the 21st century one-room school. There are still one-room schools in Maine. The existing ones in Maine are on islands, but many states still have one-room schools. And I did some extensive research. So it's sort of a day in the life of the teacher, a day in the life of the student. And each of the islands have different community issues, logistics challenges, things like that. The third book, which came out in 2015, I was asked to write the text for an illustrated children's book. It's called Island Birthday, and the nominal topic is, this kid who lives on an offshore island's birthday's coming, and the boats aren't going, and the plane's not going because the weather's terrible, and he's worrying about his birthday presents. Well, that's just kind of a device to get to the fact that we're all in this together. When things get hard and life gets frustrating, it helps to have friends. So he ends up talking to all these other people on the island who have various occupations, the lobsterman and the phone man and the postmaster and various different people. And they're all waiting for their various freight items that are delayed because of the weather. It's not just this one kid fretting about his birthday present. We're a community. We deal with these things. We help each other. We share. And for the most part, we keep each other sane when life gets a little bit exasperating. And you don't want to preach that. That doesn't make for much of a kid's book, but that's what that's about.
Uh-huh. Well, Eva, that's everything I've got for you. I want to thank you so much for speaking with me about life on Matinicus and the library and the unique, if not maybe overstated collection of banned books you've established there. I appreciate hearing about it.
Thank you very much. I'm always happy to talk about the library, and I'm excited to hear how this comes out.
You bet. Now I'll let you get back to your dozen or so jobs.
Right. There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, with a blend of Yankee ingenuity and a distaste for censorship, Eva Murray hasn't just helped build a community library on Matinicus Island. She's also taken a stand, whether she meant to or not, by curating her library's collection of banned books and then talking to the media about it. But of course, Eva hasn't done it alone. Working with her fellow volunteers, supportive donors, and even the occasional grant to build out the library. And speaking of grants, remember how Eva mentioned that the novelist Stephen King and his wife Tabitha provided support for the library through their foundation? Well, I was curious what Stephen King thought of the banned book collection that the Little Library his foundation gave a grant to. So, I emailed the foundation to see if he'd provide a comment. I wasn't sure if he'd even get my request, but plot twist, he got back to me the very next day. So, let's close out this telling of the story of banned books on Matinicus Island with this encouraging voicemail I received.
Stephen King here. My wife and I love the Matinicus Island Library and support its work. We hope the future of America doesn't include keeping banned books offshore like pirate radio stations. I tell people if a book is banned, rush to read it and find out what someone doesn't want you to know. Good luck, you guys. Bye.
For Keeps is a production of me, David Peterkowski. My thanks to Eva Murray for talking about the Matinicus Island Library, life on the remote island, and the buzz surrounding the library's collection of banned books. At forkeepspodcast.com, you'll see photos of Eva, the Shedtastic Library, and some of the noteworthy books that helped the Little Island Library make waves. The show's theme song is by Still Flyin, and the closing theme is by Eric Frisch. Additional music for this episode was provided by Sumner McCain, a guitarist and composer also from the great state of Maine. And special thanks to Stephen King for getting back to me and sharing his well wishes for Eva and the rest of the crew running the Matinicus Island Library. Thanks for listening to For Keeps. Until next time, keep on keeping on.